night's story is meant to help you relax, slow your thoughts, and gently drift into sleep. There is nothing you need to fix right now, nothing you need to solve, and nowhere else you need to be. Simply allow yourself to get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let the story carry you somewhere quiet. And if you happen to fall asleep before the story ends, that is perfectly all right. Let your shoulders soften, let your breathing slow, and when you are ready, we will begin. The traveler had been walking for a long time before the lighthouse appeared. They had not meant to walk so far. At first, they had only stepped outside the little seaside inn to clear their head. The room upstairs had been warm, the bed had been soft, and the window had looked out over the dark edge of the ocean. But sleep had not come easily. Thoughts had gathered too loudly in the quiet, circling one another like gulls over the water, and after turning over too many times beneath the blankets, the traveler had pulled on their coat, tied their boots, and slipped out into the night. The village was asleep. Windows were dark behind rain-speckled glass. Shop signs creaked gently over empty lanes. A few lanterns burned low along the main road, their flames shivering in the salt wind. Somewhere far behind the inn, a bell rang once from the little church tower, though the sound was so soft and distant that it seemed less like a warning and more like a reminder. The traveler followed the road down toward the shore. The sea was waiting there, quiet and endless. It stretched beneath a cloudy sky, dark blue and silver, where the moon broke through in thin places. The waves moved slowly, folding and unfolding against the sand, not crashing, not roaring, only breathing, in and out, in and out, a steady sound that filled the empty places of the night. The traveler walked beside it for a while, keeping to the firm sand near the dunes. Their boots left soft impressions behind them, though each one slowly blurred as the wind touched it. Ahead, the shoreline curved around a low cliff where black rocks rose like sleeping animals from the surf. They knew there was nothing beyond that point. At least, nothing they had ever seen. Only cliffside, grass, stone, and sea. But as midnight came closer, a light appeared. At first, it was so faint the traveler thought it was a star caught low in the mist. A warm point of gold, blinking between the folds of fog. Then it grew brighter, steady and patient, turning in a slow circle across the water. The traveler stopped. There, at the end of the shore, standing on the rocks where there had been nothing before, was a lighthouse. It was tall and narrow, built of dark gray stone, with weathered walls that looked as if they had stood against centuries of storms. A ring of windows circled the lantern room at the top, and behind the glass, a golden light moved slowly, sweeping over the sea, then the beach, then the cliff, then back again. The traveler looked behind them. The village was far away now, its light small and dim. They looked ahead again. The lighthouse remained. The strange thing was that it did not feel frightening. It should have. A building appearing where no building should be would have unsettled anyone. But this place had a calmness about it, as if it had been waiting there all along, hidden only until the right moment. The light did not flash sharply. It moved softly, warmly, like the glow of a candle seen from another room. The traveler stepped closer. The path to the lighthouse was made of flat stones set into the sand, though the traveler was certain those stones had not been there before. Tall grass whispered on either side. The wind smelled of salt, rain, and something faintly comforting, like old wood warmed by a fire. At the base of the lighthouse stood a heavy wooden door. It was slightly open. No sound came from inside except the low creak of the hinges and, beneath that, the muffled rhythm of the sea. The traveler raised a hand and knocked. The door moved inward at the touch. Inside was warmth, not the harsh warmth of a crowded room, but a gentle, steady warmth that seemed to have soaked into the stones themselves. The entry chamber was round, with a low ceiling and walls lined in dark wood. Several coats hung from brass hooks near the door, each one different. A fisherman's heavy oilskin, a long wool cloak, a child's little blue coat with wooden buttons, a scarf knitted in uneven rows. There was no dust on them. There was no owner either. A small fire burned in a stove against the far wall, its orange light flickering across a braided rug. Beside it was a wooden bench, a pair of slippers, and a table with a lamp already lit. The room smelled of cedar, sea air, and rain drying from old stone. The traveler stepped inside and closed the door behind them. At once, the wind softened. The sea became quieter, not gone, never gone, but softened, as though heard through layers of blankets. On the table lay a small card. The traveler leaned closer. In careful handwriting, it read, "For those who arrive tired, hang your coat, warm your hands, and climb only when ready." The traveler stood very still for a moment. Then slowly, they removed their coat and hung it on an empty hook. The act itself felt heavier than it should have, as if the coat had been carrying more than cold, as if pockets could hold old worries and collars could collect the weight of long days. Without it, the traveler felt a little lighter. They sat on the bench near the stove. The fire crackled quietly. Outside, the waves continued their slow breathing. For a while, the traveler did nothing. They simply held their hands toward the warmth and listened. In the ordinary world, silence often asked to be filled with words, with thoughts, with plans, with memories. But the silence inside the lighthouse asked for nothing. It did not pressure or prod. It simply made room. After a while, the traveler noticed a staircase curving upward along the wall. The steps were made of dark wood, polished smooth in the center by countless feet. A small lantern hung at the beginning of the stair, its flame steady behind cloudy glass. The traveler rose. The card had said to climb only when ready. They were not sure they were ready, but they were willing. That seemed to be enough. They took the lantern from its hook and placed one hand on the rail. The wood felt warm beneath their palm. Then they began to climb. The stairs curved slowly upward, close to the stone wall. Each step gave a soft, familiar creak, not alarming, just old, the kind of sound that made a person feel less alone. One step, then another, then another. The light from below faded gradually, replaced by the lantern's glow. The traveler could hear the sea through narrow windows set into the stone every few turns. Sometimes the waves sounded close, sometimes far away. Sometimes they seemed to match the traveler's breathing exactly. At the first landing, there was another door. It was painted a deep green, worn at the edges where many hands had pushed it open. A little brass plaque read, "The Listening Room." The traveler opened the door. Inside was a round room filled with soft chairs. Not fancy chairs, not stiff chairs. The kind of chairs that seem to understand tired bodies. Deep cushions, knitted blankets folded over the arms, small pillows that had lost their perfect shape from being used often and well. A low fire glowed in a hearth, and above it hung a painting of a calm sea beneath a gray sky. Near the window sat an old figure in a dark sweater. They were neither young nor ancient, neither entirely familiar nor strange. Their hair was silver, tied loosely at the back. Their face was lined in a way that suggested not sadness, but attention. They held a cup of tea in both hands and looked toward the traveler as if they had been expected. "Good evening," the keeper said. Their voice was low, soft, and unhurried. The traveler hesitated. "Are you the lighthouse keeper?" "For tonight," said the keeper. The traveler looked around the room. "Does it belong to you?" The keeper smiled faintly. "No more than the sea belongs to the shore." The traveler did not know what to say to that. The keeper gestured to the chair beside the fire. "Sit, if you like." The traveler sat. The chair accepted them completely. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The keeper seemed comfortable with silence, which made the traveler more comfortable with it too. Rain had begun to tap lightly against the window, though the traveler had not noticed rain outside. The keeper poured tea from a small pot into a cup and handed it over. The tea smelled of honey, lemon, and something floral the traveler could not name. "You do not have to tell me why you came," the keeper said. "I'm not sure I know," the traveler admitted. That is often the first honest answer. The traveler held the cup in both hands. The warmth settled into their fingers. "I wasn't lost," they said after a while. "No?" "I knew where the inn was. I knew how to get back." The keeper nodded. "There are many kinds of lost." The traveler looked into the tea. The surface reflected the firelight in tiny, shifting pieces. "I think I was just tired," they said. The keeper did not ask. Of what? That was what made the traveler continue. Tired of thinking. Tired of trying to decide what everything means. Tired of wondering whether I have done enough, or chosen correctly, or missed something important. Tired of carrying every version of what could happen next. The keeper listened, not with the bright, eager look of someone waiting to reply, not with pity, not with alarm, simply listened, as if each word could rest in the room without needing to be fixed. The traveler took a slow breath. "I suppose I came outside because I wanted the world to be quieter than my mind." The keeper nodded once. "And was it?" The traveler thought about the empty village, the dark shore, the slow waves. A little. And now, the traveler listened. The room was quiet. Their mind was quieter too. "A little more," they said. The keeper smiled. "That is enough for one room." The traveler almost laughed, but it came out as a soft exhale. They drank the tea. It was warm and sweet, but not too sweet. It tasted like something made by someone who understood that comfort did not need to be loud. The keeper stood and moved toward a shelf near the hearth. On it sat dozens of small glass bottles, each one filled with a different kind of sand. Pale sand, black sand, golden sand, gray sand with tiny shells mixed through it. "These are from the shores people carry inside them," said the keeper. The traveler looked up. Inside them? Places they have left. Places they miss. Places they fear returning to. Places they have never seen but somehow long for. The keeper touched one of the bottles gently. The sea remembers all shores. The lighthouse only helps people hear which one is calling and which one has already let them go. The traveler looked at the bottles for a long time. One bottle near the edge caught their attention. The sand inside was almost white, with a single dark pebble resting against the glass. Without knowing why, the traveler reached for it. The keeper did not stop them. As soon as their fingers touched the bottle, the traveler remembered a road from childhood after rain. A quiet kitchen at dusk. The feeling of wanting to be understood and not knowing how to ask for it. It was not a painful memory exactly, but it ached in the way old things sometimes did when they had been waiting to be noticed. The traveler set the bottle down carefully. "Some things feel heavy because we never gave them a place to sit," the keeper said. The traveler swallowed. The keeper's voice remained gentle. "You do not have to unpack everything tonight." The traveler nodded. That felt important. They did not have to unpack everything tonight. They did not have to solve every feeling. They did not have to turn each memory over and over until it explained itself. Some things could simply be noticed, then allowed to rest. The keeper returned to their chair. The fire shifted. The rain whispered against the window. After some time, the traveler stood. The keeper looked toward the door. "The next room is ready when you are." The traveler thanked them, though they were not sure whether they were thanking the keeper for the tea, the silence, or the way the room had made breathing feel easier. Perhaps all three. They returned to the staircase. The lantern flame brightened slightly as they lifted it. Upward they climbed. One step, another, another. The lighthouse seemed taller from the inside than it had from the shore. The staircase curved and curved, but never in a way that felt exhausting. Each landing arrived just when the traveler needed it. The next door was blue. Its paint looked like the evening sky just before night becomes complete. The brass plaque read, "The Room of Small Things." The traveler opened it. This room was filled with shelves. Not shelves of books, though there were a few tucked here and there. Mostly the shelves held objects, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands. A brass key tied with a red ribbon, a cracked teacup, a dried flower pressed beneath glass, a button, a feather, a silver thimble, a toy wooden horse, a postcard with faded ink, a little jar of blue thread, a smooth stone shaped almost like a heart. Each object rested in its own place, carefully kept. The room was dim except for many small lamps, each one glowing near a different shelf. The air smelled of paper, lavender, and old rain. The traveler stepped slowly between the shelves. Every object seemed ordinary, and yet not ordinary at all. Near the center of the room was a long table. On it sat a ledger open to a blank page. Beside it was a pen and a small sign. Leave only what you are ready to stop carrying. The traveler stared at the words. They looked around the room again. All these small things had belonged to someone's burden once, or someone's memory, or both. The traveler wondered what they would leave if asked to choose. They checked their pockets. There was not much inside. A few coins, a folded receipt from the inn, a handkerchief, a small flat stone they had picked up on the beach earlier without thinking. It was dark gray and cool to the touch, smooth on one side, rough on the other. They had carried it for the whole walk. They did not know why. Now, holding it in the lighthouse, they felt a strange certainty that the stone had been waiting for this room. The traveler sat at the table. The pen was heavier than it looked. They wrote slowly in the ledger. A stone from the shore, carried while thinking too much. Then, after a pause, they added, for the worry that I must know the ending before I am allowed to rest. The words looked small on the page, but the moment they were written, something eased inside them. Not disappeared, eased. The traveler placed the stone on an empty space on the shelf. A lamp above it flickered once, then settled into a steady glow. The traveler took a breath. The room seemed to approve. They moved on, walking between shelves, noticing things without touching them. A pair of spectacles with one missing lens. A candle burned halfway down. A ribbon from a gift once saved and then forgotten. A map with no names written on it. A tiny bell that made no sound when the traveler gently lifted it. At the far end of the room was a window. Through it, the traveler could see the sea below. The lighthouse beam moved across the water in slow golden arcs. Each time it passed, the surface of the waves shone briefly, then returned to dark blue. The traveler rested their forehead against the cool glass. They had not realized how much they had been bracing themselves all day. Around the shoulders, behind the eyes, in the jaw, in the chest, as if some part of them had been quietly preparing for something difficult, even when nothing difficult was happening. The lighthouse did not ask them to brace. The room of small things did not ask them to hold everything at once. It only offered shelves, places to set things down. A soft knock came from behind them. The traveler turned. No one was there, but on the table, the ledger had turned to a new page. Written there in the same careful handwriting as the card downstairs were the words, "You may return for the rest another night." The traveler smiled faintly. That was kind. They left the room with empty hands. The staircase waited, higher still. The steps curved upward through the stone, past narrow windows where rain streaked gently down the glass. At one window, the traveler paused. The shore below had almost vanished beneath mist. The village lights were gone completely now, not extinguished exactly, simply hidden. The lighthouse felt separate from the world, not removed in a lonely way, protected. The next landing held a door made of pale wood. The plaque read, "The Map Room." Inside, the walls were covered in maps. Some were old sea charts with curling edges and inked coastlines. Others were maps of forests, mountains, rivers, cities, and roads that looped through places the traveler had never seen. Some maps showed only rooms. Some showed gardens. Some showed skies. One map, pinned near the fireplace, appeared to show the pattern of rain. A large round table stood in the center. On it lay a map unlike all the others. It showed the coastline outside the lighthouse, drawn in black ink and soft watercolor. There was the village, the inn, the dunes, the curved shore, the low cliff. And there, at the edge of the water, was the lighthouse. The traveler leaned closer. A tiny mark showed where they had begun walking. Another mark showed where they stood now. Between the two was a dotted line following the beach. The traveler touched it lightly. The ink shimmered. For a moment, they saw themselves from above, a small figure walking beside the immense dark sea, not as lost as they had felt, not as foolish as they feared, simply moving through the night one step at a time. There was comfort in seeing it that way. From inside a worry, everything could feel endless. From above, it was just a path. A voice spoke softly from the other side of the room. Most people think maps are for deciding where to go. The traveler turned. The keeper stood near the shelves, though the traveler had not heard them enter. "Aren't they?" the traveler asked. "Sometimes," said the keeper. "But often they are for showing us that we have already been moving." The traveler looked back at the map. The dotted line glowed faintly. "I don't always feel like I'm moving," they said. "No," said the keeper. "You often feel the effort more than the distance." The traveler let that settle. The keeper came to stand beside them. On the table, the map began to change. The shore faded, and other paths appeared. A road through summer fields. A hallway lit by candles. A train window silvered with rain. A bridge over a river at dusk. A staircase in a house the traveler almost remembered. "Are these places I've been?" the traveler asked. Some. Some are places you imagined so clearly they became part of your inner country. Some are places you may yet go. Some are simply the shape of feelings." The traveler watched a narrow path appear through a dark forest. It should have looked frightening, but there were lanterns along it, small and golden. "Do all paths lead somewhere?" they asked. The keeper considered this. "All paths change the one who walks them," they said. "That is not always the same as leading somewhere." The traveler looked at the map for a long while. Then they noticed something. Many of the paths did not continue forever. Some faded gently. Some ended at doors. Some turned into rivers. Some became dotted lines and then disappeared into blank space. That one has no ending, the traveler said, pointing to a road that vanished near the edge of the page. Not yet, said the keeper. What if I choose wrong? The keeper's expression remained calm. Then you will learn the shape of that road. The traveler sighed. That doesn't sound very reassuring. It is not meant to promise that every road is easy, the keeper said, only that no road is wasted if you are awake enough to notice what it teaches you. The traveler looked down at their hands. I'm tired of lessons. The keeper nodded. Then tonight is not for lessons. The map softened. The lines faded until only the lighthouse remained, drawn in warm gold. Tonight is only for rest. The traveler closed their eyes. For a few moments they listened to the rain on the roof, the sea below, the faint turning of the lantern above. Everything in the lighthouse moved slowly. Nothing hurried them forward. When they opened their eyes, the keeper was gone. On the table, the map now showed only the staircase and one glowing mark at the next landing. The traveler followed it. They climbed again. The staircase became narrower near the upper rooms, but the lantern flame remained steady. The traveler's steps slowed, not from exhaustion exactly, but from the deepening quiet that seemed to collect with every floor. The next door was darker than the others, almost black, but polished until it reflected the lantern light. The plaque read, "The Room of Night Sounds." The traveler opened the door. At first, they thought the room was empty. It was not. It was full of sound, gentle sound, layered sound, rain ticking against glass, waves folding over sand, a fire murmuring low in a hearth, wind moving through long grass, a distant clock marking time in a room far away, floorboards settling, a kettle just beginning to steam, pages turning, a cat purring somewhere unseen. The room itself was simple. A soft rug covered most of the floor. Cushions were scattered near the walls. There was no bright light, only several shaded lamps, each casting a small pool of amber glow. In the center was a low bed or couch with a thick blanket folded at the foot. The traveler stepped inside and immediately felt their body respond. Their breathing slowed. Their shoulders dropped. The sounds did not compete with one another. They blended gently as if each had found its place in the dark. A little sign near the door read, "Choose the sound that lets you stop listening for danger." The traveler read it twice. Stop listening for danger. They had not known they were doing that. But perhaps they had been. Listening for what might go wrong. Listening for disappointment. Listening for the next demand. Listening for the sound of something they had forgotten. The traveler moved slowly around the room. Near one lamp, rain was strongest. Near another, the fire. Near another, the ocean. Near the window, the wind through grass rose and fell in soft waves of its own. The traveler sat on the floor near the ocean sound. It was not exactly the ocean outside. It was softer, closer, almost like the memory of the sea rather than the sea itself. Each wave arrived, unfolded, and retreated. Then another came, then another. Nothing sudden, nothing sharp, only return and release, The traveler lay back against the cushions. They had meant only to rest for a moment. The ceiling above was painted midnight blue, with tiny silver stars scattered across it. Some stars were bright, others were barely visible. The longer the traveler looked, the more appeared. The sound of the ocean filled the room. In, out, in, out. The traveler's eyes grew heavy. A thought came to them, soft and uninvited. I am allowed to be tired. It was such a simple thought that at first they almost missed it. Then it came again. I am allowed to be tired, not lazy, not failing, not falling behind. Tired, and tired things were allowed to rest. The traveler pulled the blanket over themselves. It smelled faintly of clean cotton and lavender. For a while, they drifted, not asleep, not fully awake, somewhere between. In that soft middle place, the sounds seemed to become images, rain silvering a window, a fire folding inward, grass bending beneath a moonlit wind, waves smoothing stone, pages turning in a room where no one needed to speak. The traveler might have stayed there until morning, but eventually the lighthouse beam passed across the window, warm and golden, and touched their face. They opened their eyes. The room was waiting. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt softer. The traveler sat up slowly. The blanket slipped from their shoulders. By the door, a small lamp brightened, showing the way back to the stairs. The traveler stood, folded the blanket carefully, and whispered thank you to the room, though there was no one there to hear it. Or perhaps everything heard it. The staircase led higher. The traveler could feel now that they were nearing the top. The air had changed. It was cooler, clearer, touched with the smell of rain and metal and distant sky. The stone walls hummed softly with the turning of the great light above. The next landing held no door at first, only an archway covered by a curtain of pale fabric. The plaque beside it read, "The Memory Room." The traveler hesitated. The other rooms had been gentle, but memory was a different kind of door. Still, the lighthouse had not forced anything. It had only offered. The traveler pushed the curtain aside. The memory room was filled with moonlight. Not real moonlight, perhaps, because the sky outside was still thick with cloud, but a soft silver glow that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The room was wide and circular, with shallow bowls of water placed on stands throughout the space. Each bowl was perfectly still. In each one, a small image shimmered. The traveler walked carefully between them. In one bowl, they saw someone laughing at a kitchen table. In another, a hand waving from a train window. In another, a child running through tall grass. In another, an empty room with sunlight on the floor. None of the memories seemed to belong to the traveler at first. They were simply moments, tiny pieces of lives. Loved, lost, forgotten, remembered. At the center of the room stood one larger bowl made of dark stone. The water inside reflected nothing. The traveler approached it slowly. A note rested beside it. Some memories arrive when you stop chasing them. The traveler looked into the water. At first, there was only darkness. Then, slowly, an image appeared. They saw themselves much younger, sitting somewhere quiet, trying very hard to be brave. They saw the way their small hands held tightly to something simple: a toy, a cup, a blanket. It hardly mattered. They saw the expression on their younger face, the effort of understanding too much and not enough at the same time. The traveler felt their chest tighten, not painfully, tenderly. They wanted to reach into the water and tell that younger self something, that it would be all right, that they did not have to know everything, that growing older would not mean becoming unbreakable, that even adults sometimes needed warm rooms, kind silence, and a place to set down stones. The water rippled. The younger self looked up. For one impossible moment, they seemed to see the traveler. The traveler placed one hand over their heart. "You did well," they whispered. The image softened. The water became still again. The traveler stood there for a long time. Then the keeper's voice came from beside the curtain. "Memory is not always asking us to return," they said. "Sometimes it only wants to be greeted at the door." The traveler turned. The keeper stood in the silver light, hands folded calmly in front of them. "I thought remembering would make me feel worse," the traveler said. "It can," said the keeper, "when we mistake remembering for reliving." The traveler looked back at the bowl. The surface now reflected the ceiling, the lamps, the soft curve of the room. "How do you know the difference?" The keeper came closer. "When a memory takes you by force, it feels like being pulled under. When you meet it gently, here, now, with your feet beneath you, it becomes a visitor." "A visitor," the traveler repeated. "Yes, you may offer it a chair. You do not have to give it the whole house." The traveler breathed out slowly. That felt like something they would want to remember. The keeper gestured toward the curtain. "The lantern room is above. You may climb when you are ready." The traveler looked around the memory room one more time. The bowls shimmered softly. So many lives, so many moments, so many things carried and set down and carried differently. The traveler left the room gently. The final staircase was narrow, and the steps were made of iron instead of wood. They spiraled upward through the center of the tower. Above, the golden light turned with a low, steady rhythm. The traveler climbed slowly. The sound of the mechanism became clearer. A soft click, a hum, a whisper of glass and metal. Click, hum, turn, click, hum, turn. At the top was a round hatch standing open. Warm light spilled through it. The traveler stepped into the lantern room. The sea surrounded them. Glass windows curved all around the chamber, streaked with rain, glowing where the great lens turned at the center. The lantern itself was enormous, made of brass and crystal, its many rings catching and bending the flame into a beam that moved across the dark water. The light was not harsh. It was deep gold, soft at the edges, warm as candlelight, but strong enough to reach the horizon. The keeper stood beside the lens, one hand resting lightly on the railing. For a while, neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say yet. The traveler walked to the glass and looked out. Below, the shoreline was hidden in mist. The rocks appeared and vanished as the light passed over them. The sea moved endlessly, dark and calm. Far away, clouds parted just enough to reveal a narrow band of stars. The lighthouse beam turned across the water, across the rain, across the traveler's face, then away again. "Does it really not guide ships?" the traveler asked at last. "Not ships," said the keeper. "Then what does it guide?" The keeper looked out at the sea, the part of a person that still knows how to come home. The traveler leaned against the railing. "What if that part gets too quiet?" "It does not disappear," said the keeper. "It waits." The lantern turned. The traveler watched the beam move across the darkness. And the lighthouse appears when someone needs it, when someone is ready to see it. The traveler thought about the walk, the shore, the light appearing through fog. "I almost didn't come inside. Many almost don't. What happens to them?" The keeper smiled gently. "The lighthouse remains kind. It may appear again another night." The traveler liked that. A place that did not punish hesitation. A place that did not demand readiness. A place that waited. They stood together in the turning light. The traveler could feel the rooms below them, stacked quietly beneath their feet. The entry room with its warm stove and waiting hooks. The listening room with its tea and silence. The room of small things with its shelves and ledger. The map room with its shifting paths. The room of night sounds with its waves and rain. The memory room with its silver bowls. Each room had taken something heavy and made space around it. Not removed it, not erased it. Made space. Perhaps that was what rest did. It did not always solve the day. It made space around it. The keeper moved to a small table near the lantern. On it rested a book bound in dark blue leather. "This is the log," they said. The traveler came closer. The pages were filled with names, dates, and short lines written by many different hands. Some were simple. "I was here. I needed quiet. I left my fear on the third shelf. I remembered my mother's garden. I heard the sea and slept. I did not know I was tired until I stopped." The traveler touched the edge of the page. The keeper offered the pen. "You may write, if you like." The traveler took it. For a moment they did not know what to say. Then they wrote, "I came here restless. I found rooms inside the dark. I am leaving lighter than I arrived." They paused, then added, "The sea was kind tonight." The ink dried almost immediately. The keeper closed the book. The lantern turned. Below them, the sea continued breathing. The traveler began to feel sleepy now. Truly sleepy. Not the frustrated kind from earlier when they had wanted sleep but could not reach it. This was different. It rose slowly from somewhere deep, warm and heavy, spreading through the body like candlelight through a room. The keeper seemed to notice. "There is one more place," they said. The traveler blinked. "Above this?" The keeper shook their head. "Not above. Within." They walked to the far side of the lantern room, where a small alcove curved into the stone. The traveler had not noticed it before. Inside was a narrow bed built into the wall beneath a round window. A thick quilt lay folded at the foot, and a small reading lamp glowed beside it. "The lighthouse keeps a resting place near the light," said the keeper, "for those who are not ready to return before dawn." The traveler looked at the bed. It was simple, perfect. Through the round window, they could see the ocean and the slow sweep of gold across the rain. "I can sleep here?" "For as long as the night allows." The traveler sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped softly beneath them. They removed their boots and set them neatly aside. The keeper unfolded the quilt and placed it over their legs with the quiet care of someone tucking in a guest who had traveled far. The traveler looked up. "Will I remember this place?" The keeper considered. "You may not remember every room. Dreams often fold their maps by morning." They smiled. "But you will remember the feeling of having been welcomed." The traveler nodded. That would be enough. The keeper dimmed the lamp. The lantern outside continued its slow turning, filling the little alcove with passing waves of golden light. Bright, soft, dim, dark, bright, soft, dim, dark. The traveler lay back. The pillow was cool. The quilt was warm. Rain whispered against the glass. The sea moved below. The lighthouse hummed gently around them, old stone and wood and light holding steady against the night. The keeper's voice came softly from the doorway. "Rest now. The shore will find you in the morning." The traveler wanted to answer, but sleep was already near. They watched the golden light move across the ceiling. Once, twice, again. Their thoughts, which had felt so sharp earlier, were no longer sharp. They had softened at the edges. Some had been left on shelves. Some had been heard by the fire. Some had become roads on a map. Some had washed out with the tide. There would be time later for thinking. There would be time later for decisions. There would be time later for returning to the world and all its little demands. But not now. Now there was only the lighthouse, the rain, the sea, the quilt, the turning light. The traveler breathed in and out, in and out. The room darkened and brightened with each slow pass of the lantern. At some point, the traveler no longer knew whether their eyes were open or closed. The sound of the ocean became part of their breathing. The warmth of the quilt became part of the room. The lighthouse became less like a place they had entered and more like a dream that had kindly opened around them. And finally, gently, without noticing the exact moment it happened, the traveler fell asleep. Morning came without hurry. It arrived first as a pale gray softness behind the clouds, then as a quiet brightening of the air. The rain had stopped. The sea was calm. The tide had drawn back from the rocks, leaving pools of silver water between them. The traveler woke to the sound of gulls. For a moment, they did not move. They were lying in bed at the seaside inn. Their own room, their own blanket. Their boots stood near the door, dry and neatly placed. Their coat hung over the chair. The window was open just a little, letting in the smell of salt and morning air. The traveler sat up slowly. Had they dreamed it? The shore, the light, the rooms, the keeper. They looked at their hands. There was no lantern, no teacup, no blue leather logbook. But something was different. The tightness behind their eyes was gone. Their shoulders felt loose. Their mind was quiet in a way it had not been the night before. The traveler rose and went to the window. Outside, the village was waking. A baker opened his shutters. A woman crossed the lane with a basket. Smoke rose from chimneys in soft gray ribbons. Beyond the rooftops, the beach curved toward the low cliff. There was no lighthouse, only rocks, seagrass, and morning mist. The traveler watched for a long time. Then they noticed something on the windowsill, a small, smooth stone, dark gray, smooth on one side, rough on the other. The traveler picked it up. They knew that stone, and yet they had left it on a shelf in the lighthouse. For a moment, their heart beat a little faster. Then they turned the stone over. On the smooth side, in tiny, careful letters, were the words, "You may return for the rest another night." The traveler smiled. Outside, the sea breathed in and out. The morning was still quiet. The day had not yet asked too much of them. They placed the stone beside the bed, where they would see it before sleeping. Then they made tea. They dressed slowly. They opened the window a little wider and let the sound of the ocean fill the room. And though the lighthouse was gone, its warmth remained somewhere inside them. A room of listening, a shelf for small things, a map that showed they had been moving, a place where night sounds gathered softly, a silver bowl for memory, a lantern turning patiently through the dark. The traveler did not know when they would see the lighthouse again, but they no longer needed to search for it. Some places could not be found by searching. Some places appeared when the world became quiet enough. And somewhere beyond the shore, beyond the mist, beyond the ordinary shape of the morning, the lighthouse waited.